Good morning, good afternoon. Pleasure to be here with you all today in this illustrious space and with this amazing panel. We've already had the introductions. This session is going to be about, yes, the topic du jour, generative AI, but kind of taking a different tack at this. We're going to be talking about humanity. We're going to be talking about things like human intelligence. We're going to speak about what it means to be human and what it means to have generative AI as a part of our lives as we have today. So to get that started, I would love to welcome our first speaker, Arun. Would you like to go ahead and get us started?
All right, great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm going to be talking about generative AI, and my clicker is not working. Okay, all right. Sorry, so generative AI, we all know what it is. They have the wrong version of the slides up there, so I'm just going to skip my slides.
Oh, wow, you can't see it.
I'm just going to skip my slides and talk to you guys. We all know what generative AI is. Many of us have used something like DALL-E or Midjourney to generate new art. We've all used ChatGPT to draft new documents or at least redraft existing ones. And we think of generative AI in many ways as reflecting or replicating the entirety, some subset of the entirety of human knowledge. But what we don't realize is that generative AI can also replicate the style of individuals and institutions, specific individuals and institutions. This has led to a slew of lawsuits around copyright infringement. I think that many of them are going to resolve in the short term based on whether or not the interpretation of fair use, the use of AI for training, use of data for training AI is considered fair use or not. So a first challenge that we seem to face is how do we balance the evolution of future AI innovation with the need to protect today's intellectual property rights. But if we dig a little deeper, it seems like there's a more insidious challenge lurking. There are a number of the facets of our individuality that are starting to be replicated and digitized. We're all familiar with the fact that there are digital twins of us that have been created for digital advertising purposes. They're trained on every click, every purchase, whether you stop and scroll, like every glance at your smartphone. These signals get richer and richer every year, they do. And as they do, these twins of ours get more nuanced and sophisticated, increasingly perfect replicas of us. Companies are increasingly creating AI assistants that are replicas of you, trained on your Slack messages, your documents, your emails. You might even welcome the creation of this AI assistant. Today you can offload some of your email replying, document drafting to it. But tomorrow, you don't know if you're going to be competing with it for your next job when you leave your employer because your digital twin might stay behind. So the second challenge that I see from generative AI is what are the boundaries that we need to put around our ownership of ourself? Our likeness, our voice, our artistic style, our creative process, our human capital. Because for me, the real promise of generative AI is that it has the potential to decentralize ownership of the means of production. We can create, more and more entrepreneurs, educators, healthcare workers, financial analysts, creatives, who are empowered to own a slice of the economy, enabled by generative AI. But if we don't put the boundaries around the ownership of human capital right, then what we're going to end up with is a centralization of ownership rather than a decentralization. And in many ways, this leads to the third challenge, which is what is the right balance we want to strike in the future between AI-led creation and human-led creation. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that AI-led innovation will dramatically increase productivity. It will probably take GDP to places that we haven't seen before. But there are challenges, right? Human beings like to create. I mean, if we don't have that ability to create, to own what we create, this challenges our human dignity. It changes what it means to be human. So I'm not saying I have all the answers. I don't even have the right slides, so clearly I don't have the answers. But what I am saying is that we need to make these choices about how we want to design our world thoughtfully and deliberately. Because otherwise, other forces are going to design them for us, and we may not like the world that we end up with. Thank you.
Thank you, Arun. Lots of important questions and insights there, which we'll get into when we start our panel discussion. Paula Goldman, welcome.
Thank you. And again, I don't know what slides are up there, if any. There we go. Okay, so I'm here to talk about trusted AI for business. And obviously, this panel session is generative AI that cares. So I have to start by saying, AI doesn't care. Caring is something that humans do. But it is possible to create AI that tells us when we should care, when our businesses should care. For example, pointing out times when we may need to alter the safeguards and protocols in our automated systems, or times when an output of an AI may not have the right confidence score, and you want someone in your business to take a second look before hitting publish. Those are the kinds of AI interactions I get really excited about. And look, if you have been to any panel today, reading any newspaper, doing your job, you know that AI is transforming business in every industry, right? At Salesforce, we're super excited that our Einstein platform delivers 1 trillion transactions and predictions every week, that our co-pilots are helping service people, salespeople, marketers, and many more create actions, deliver campaigns, write code, and so on. And all of it is built on data cloud that allows trap data to get into your systems across all of your platforms with governance built in. But the thing is, businesses only adopt AI if it's trustworthy. And these are the issues we've been hearing about as the world has been, enamored with generative AI over the last few years, the last year in particular. Accuracy. You've heard the hallucination problem. We like to call it confabulations because, again, AI is not alive, it does not hallucinate, but it does make errors. Bias and fairness, privacy and security. I know this is really important to telcos in particular. You want to make sure that your data is not being used to train some third-party model. And then, of course, job impact, which Arun just talked very nicely about. We want to make sure that we're in control of how AI is impacting our jobs and that is equitable to everyone in terms of access. So that's where my office comes in. I have a rather unique job. 5 years ago, Salesforce created the Office of Ethical and Humane Use to make sure to pioneer what trustworthy AI and technology looks like for business, for the enterprise. And like many, we started with principles for trustworthy AI, new guidelines for trustworthy generative AI, but we quickly moved to policies. And I think we're amongst the first to create an acceptable use policy for AI that includes things like facial recognition or how to disclose when a human being is interacting with an automated system. But most important of all are the protections that need to be built natively into products to make them work, to make them trustworthy. And while I don't have time to get into all the nuance of it, let me say this. You've all heard the concept of human in the loop, right? This is the idea, for example, you're working with a generative model and it drafts an email that you might want to send on to your customer, But before you send that email, you take a look, you make sure it's good, you edit it, and you send it off. That's human in the loop. You're reviewing the output. Well, AI is becoming more and more powerful and more autonomous as we talk about things like assistants and agents. And it is very important to shift that focus to what we call human at the helm. What does that mean? It means designing so that you're combining the best of human intelligence and the best of what automated systems are good for, but making sure that the human is ultimately in control of all aspects of the outcomes, right? A few examples, explainability features. So like AI creates an output for you, maybe answers a question, a chatbot answers a question. Where does that come from? So you have citations that say exactly where the data came from that inform the answer, a confidence score that helps you assess, like, how much should I trust this answer? Or more importantly, audit trails, control panels. Imagine control panels that allow you to see exactly how many actions an AI has taken, whether they were well received or not, where there might be problems, lets you go in and say, adjust a prompt and the tone of a prompt, and then see exactly what the outputs look like. Increasingly, that is the kind of design that we need in our AI systems, and that's increasingly the kind of literacy that we need from our own employees to be able to assess whether AI is working or not and to adjust appropriately. I'll end with this. We don't know where AI is going, but here's a great quote from Rachel Botsman, an author and expert on trusted technology. Trust is a confident relationship with the unknown. If we can design with human at the helm and with trust at the center, I'm certain that AI will take all of our businesses and society in a really exciting direction.
Thank you, Paula. That's really inspiring, the pioneering work that Salesforce is doing on the part of human in the helm. I'd never heard that before. Did you guys coin that?
I think so.
It's awesome. Ariadna, welcome.
Thank you. Let's see. Okay, I think you're seeing it. All right, so I have the challenge to talk about what are the challenges for society. Big topic for 5 minutes, but let's just get with it. Some facts that I think are pretty unavoidable. The first one, I can't actually see my slides, but as you probably know, there is massive social change that's actually going to unfold and already unfolding in the next few months and years. Education, workforce, long list. So it's here. The second one, I see it now. The future presidents and leaders will actually have a higher concentration of power than in the past. Just in this year, I think we'll have over 40 countries having elections and about 4 billion people being able to vote. So this is just going to be a really important time to protect our democratic and elections processes. And it's challenging for reasons that I'll speak in a minute. And the third aspect is because of the way that auto-hacking has been scaling with generative AI, there is new and more vulnerabilities to our systems and platforms that are emerging. And so this is all kind of coming to its head right now as we have more elections and as things are speeding up. But maybe I like to start with, so this, of course, we'll talk about what to do about it. And before I even dive in, I always like to start with the goal in mind. As a technology, what are we trying to do? So for me, I want to create trustworthy, and Paula was just talking about that, unhealthy digital experiences. And so something to realize is that, of course, AI should be built and used with the supporting and protecting human values. So there's, I guess, another way to say human at the helm. And this is not something obvious that happens for free with generative AI, so we need to do work. And I want to talk about AI also similar to doesn't care. It really doesn't. It's a tool, right? So it's a tool. There is many benefits. As a society, we can lean into the opportunities that it will unfold for us, and we probably should. This is just an example for social media. We have AI technologies used for recommending content to us, so what we can see and what personalization that we get exposed to. The flip side of the coin is content moderation, where it decides what we don't get to see. These are really good tools, especially when they're accelerating the manual revision of unwanted content. But, however, there is, even with the good uses of technology, which is the case, we have a lot of discussion to do around what values are we implementing with the system, what types of decisions is the model automatically making, are we okay with that, what is even acceptable, what are the thresholds, is the training data the right data, does it extrapolate in a different population? So there is a ton of questions. So it's not about just deploying these algorithms as fast as we can and call it a day. That's definitely not the case. So you probably have noticed an expansion or an explosion of spam and like fake content. Who's here seen that in their daily lives or at work? Not that many. Maybe I'm the only one being spammed. Okay, so I have seen this, and if you think about it, generative AI makes it extremely easy to automatically blast out deepfakes, misinformation campaigns, just spin up a bunch of bots. And so, of course, these kinds of things are going to get much worse before they get better. And these are things that I'm already experiencing, maybe some of you are already experiencing. So I also wanted to talk about why isn't maybe a wider adoption in the enterprise. Besides the ethical concerns, and Paula was talking a little bit about that, we have sustainability concerns, which we can talk about it in the Q&A. But in addition to the energy consumption, for me, it's about making it accessible and not making the digital divide worse, so that not just a few people can actually have access and benefit, but hopefully everyone is able to access and benefit from these technologies. And one of the most critical ones is us. What do we want the pace to be? What level of change do we want? And if you think historically, it took, I think, 40 years for electricity to replace steam in the factories, right? So it takes time for us to change. And so, how do we do that with generative AI? Value alignment is really critical. It's how do you actually take these models and the output and make sure that it reflects human preferences, from human rights to companies' policies. Then transparency, Paula was talking about that as well, and explainability, really important when bad actors are trying to deceive using AI. And then, of course, social inclusion. This is, by the way, something that in my new company, those are the 3 pillars of what we do, which is alignment for these open source LLMs to help companies adhere to their policies. So just maybe to conclude, you are all a key part of this revolution, and it is a revolution. And there is here in Barcelona and Catalonia, there is actually civicai.cat, which is an organization that's looking after these sorts of problems, making sure we're making an ethical use and that everybody has access to these technologies. And I think there's 135 volunteer founders, myself included. So hopefully you can also do your piece and make sure that we're all making a responsible use of AI. I think that's it.
Thank you, Ariadna. Wonderful presentation. So now is when we get started and start chatting about all of the pressing questions that have come up. I was going to ask you guys, why should we be able to trust AI? But I think that's quite obvious. I want to turn it around and ask you, what happens when you can't trust AI? What are the consequences of not being able to trust AI? And all of you are coming from kind of a different perspective. So I'd love to hear from each and every one of you if it's possible. Arun?
Okay. I think, if you look at the history of business, economic activity has always been transformed when a new form of trust emerges. We went from peer-to-peer to government-based trust, institutions, first in China, then in medieval Europe, contracts, courts of law, brand-based trust, and over the last 20 years, platform-based trust. And so a lack of trust in AI is going to significantly hold back its commercial impact, because without that trust, people aren't going to take the risks that they need to interact with the AI. They're not going to be willing to commit to this collaborative effort before they know how the AI is going to behave. And one of the things that I've seen in my research about what causes someone to trust an AI is, at least in the short run, a familiarity with some human-to-human interaction that is similar. So people in the United States, for example, are more likely to trust medical AI because they're used to seeing a stranger in a white coat who says they're an expert, give them a diagnosis. They are much less likely to trust an AI that offers them financial advice because they don't have an analogy for interacting with a stranger in that context.
That's so interesting. Well, I will build on what Arun said too, because I think throughout history proves his point, right? Like think about, for example, when commercial automobiles were first introduced, and horses and commercial automobiles were like running into each other on the road. Pedestrians were dying, right? If we hadn't created a series of road rules, we wouldn't have an automobile industry. Salesforce knows, an example very near and dear to Salesforce. When technology started moving into the cloud, people rightly asked, how can I trust it? How do I know it's secure, right? If we hadn't figured that out collectively, if we didn't have accountability and standards and measurability around that kind of stuff, there would be no cloud industry today, right? So similarly, it is tempting to think about trust as a nice to have, but it is not. Like it is both an accelerant and it can be a detractor to commercial success if it's not there.
I'd like to offer maybe a different perspective, which I think the problem that I see with generative AI is that it sounds so convincing that if you're not an expert in whatever it is, you actually trust it when you shouldn't. So I think we also have the reverse problem where, how many of you have gone to ChatGPT, asked something you have known nothing about and just swallowed it like a pill? It's like, sure, it sounds convincing, it sounds educated, it gives you facts. And so to me, trust is complicated. Obviously, we need to build it in social media. Trust, you don't have a business. So clearly, or I think any business, if your customers don't trust you, users don't trust you, you don't have a business. So obviously AI needs to be trustworthy, but the problem is it sounds like you could trust it and you're not sure. So I think that's where education and understanding of technology, how it works, is so critical, so people can have that critical thinking and can actually understand how and when to trust technology. And I think user experience needs to really help with that and make sure that like you were talking about design, obviously, like designing systems so that the limitations are very obvious and not just easy to not see, something like that.
Yeah, because the fascinating thing about generative AI is that it actually makes everything up.
Right.
I mean, it's not retrieving information. This is how it's designed to work. So we're probably going to go through a trust cycle where we have too much trust, then we're going to have too little trust, and then we're going to find the right level of trust.
Yeah.
And bringing that transparency and that explainability to the user experience is going to be educative, as you mentioned, Ariadna. Great. So talking about trust, I think the words trust and ethics are sometimes interchangeably used. I wanted to ask you either what ethical AI actually looks like or what trustworthy AI looks like and who defines that. Because Ariadna, to your point, you were talking about building in values. Whose values are they, right? These are questions that I think are huge. I don't know if anyone had a special opinion on this particular topic.
I'd love to start with the value alignment. I thought a lot about this problem, and this is the focus of our company called Alinia, which is no accident. And it's obviously every society, every even company will have its own sets of values, and that's really important because OpenAI are not universal values. They obviously embed and encode values into ChatGPT, but is that the same as someone in Abu Dhabi is going to want? Like, probably not. And so this is a very important point, and it's like actually something that needs to be customizable and needs to be made obvious and explain and say, hey, these are the set of values. Are you okay with that, or do you want to change them because this is in the service to you, to your company? And so value customization, which is like policies, all those things are really important. And to your point about ethics and is it the same? I mean, I think it's the foundation, but it's such a hard thing to pinpoint. I think values and policies are maybe, for me, the best way to get to that and say, if you're doing that according to the universal value or like the human rights values. Like that's your substrate, and then build on top based on society, company, individuals.
Yeah.
And I think that there are two separate questions there. I think what a trustworthy AI is going to be relatively easy to define. It's one where people are willing to collaborate with it eventually. It meets the expectations. I think it will never be possible to completely define what an ethical AI is, in the same way that we don't have a universal definition of what an ethical human being is. There are different philosophies. But I think we're also going to hit a trade-off between our AIs representing the values that we aspire to and the AIs representing the reality of the world. You see this when you're trying to debias generative AI systems. Do you want them to reflect the facts, or do you want them to reflect society's aspirations when they are making something up about the future? And again, there's no good answer to this question, which is why ethical AI is always going to be, well, we're going to have lots of panels about ethical AI.
It tends to be nebulous, yes.
Well, I was just going to add to your other question about who owns it. I mean, the obvious answer is all of us have to, right? We were chatting before about it's important to, for example, have functions like mine. As the technology is moving very quickly, you want to make sure you're really thinking ahead. But at the same time, government is playing in a really critical role, right? It's so heartening to see governments paying attention, draft regulations and regulations coming to the fore. And even to your point, that each individual company or organization that's deploying AI needs to be able to customize it, right? In the sense of like, what's your brand voice? What are the actual data that you want to focus your AI outputs on? Like, how do all of that kind of stuff? So the answer really is all of us.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So I wanted to kind of build off of what you just said, Arun, about debiasing models. I think when we talk about ethical AI, trustworthy AI, all the buzzwords come up, right? We're talking about exploitability, we're talking about transparency, but we don't always talk about ethical implications down the value chain. So when we're developing, maybe yes, but when we're deploying, maybe not. So I'm thinking about things like using, for instance, people in emerging economies for annotating data sets. I'm thinking about the carbon footprint. Is this part of the equation of having trustworthy and ethical AI systems?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So I think that there's a bunch of familiar issues that come up with AI, like they've come up with other technological progress, sustainability, the ethical use of labor. But there are some unique issues that go beyond debiasing. One, for example, is cultural orientation. A vast majority of the data that generative AI systems are trained on tends to reflect a certain small fraction of the world. And I think part of the driver of sovereign AI, the desire of companies to develop their own AI, this is what's driving NVIDIA's stock price to the levels that it's at, is a desire to ensure that the generative systems that your citizens are accessing reflect not necessarily the values, but the culture and the literature and the art that is indigenous to your country, as opposed to it simply being something that happened to be in the early training data sets.
Right. Any other opinions?
I was to your point about, is it just, what are the aspects that comprise responsibility? I have found the public discussion and the regulatory discussion to focus almost exclusively on models.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Who's the people that are creating the models. And that is very, very, very important.
Right.
But there's the data that goes into the models. There are the apps that are built on top of the models. And then there are the companies and organizations using the apps and customizing it with their own data, right? It's a layer cake, and we need to be looking at all points of that and the responsibilities of all points of that, because otherwise, if we just stop at the models, we're not getting to the end uses, and that's also where a lot of the responsibility
Absolutely.
lies.
The areas of application also has an ethical
Yeah.
kind of aspect to it as well, of course. Okay, I can't believe that time is running out the way it is. This conversation could go on forever. I had a lot more questions for you, but I'll end with another big one, since we only have a minute or so left. Generative AI, is it making us less human or more?
I think that that's going to depend on the choices that we make around the scope of ownership of the human. We are at a phase now where we are ceding more of ourselves to these AI systems de facto without thinking carefully about what should the right division between parts of us that are in a centralized AI system be, and how much control should we have over it. So I think if we retain control over ourselves and our representation in an AI, it will end up making us more human. If AI takes over and starts to lead all of human creations, it'll change our notion of what it means to be human.
Excellent. Paula?
My hope is similar, right? That AI done well helps the doctor interact with the person and pay attention and take notes in the background that are accurate. That it helps a service person answer a query more quickly, but put the human touch into the service interaction. So my hope is it does free us up to do more of what humans are really good at.
Yeah. Enabling humanity, really.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say along the same lines, it's up to us. It's the last call I was making is like we need to decide how and when we want to use models and how and when we want to be really in charge. We might enjoy something that's very tedious and we might not want to automate that.
Yeah.
So if we give the voice to the society and each of us has a voice at the time of design and use, then I think it will make us more human, frees us up to do what we want, but it is definitely a slippery slope, and if we don't act proactively, it could lead us to a place that's not going to be very fun.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the fascinating conversation. Thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Arun, Paula, and Ariadna. Thank you.
Thank you.